For folks that are just joining us this morning, I am Nathan Jones. I'm an associate professor of special ed and ed policy here at Boston University, and I'll be moderating this panel, although it's the kind of panel where I feel like my role as moderator is to just very efficiently ask a question and then get the heck out of the way, because we have three really great speakers joining us. So we have already heard from Roberto. I want to introduce two of our other speakers who are joining us today. The first is Alicia Gatewood, who has been in public education for the past 20 years in Indiana. She is quick to note that she has only recently shifted over to the Department of Education in Indiana, but she is a longtime educator. She has spent 20 years in Indiana. Her passion for Black and Brown children is evident by the work she has done. She has served as a middle and high school English teacher, high school assistant principal, and elementary school principal, and has always chosen to work in Title I schools. In 2013, her school was awarded a National Blue Ribbon, and she currently serves in the Indiana Department of Education as the Senior Director of Student Supports and Accessibility. Alicia, thank you for joining us. And finally, we have Brandon Cardet-Hernandez. As a lifelong educator, Cardet-Hernandez has worked as a community organizer, college and career counselor, and special education teacher. He is currently the executive director of the Ivy Street School. Previously, he led a successful turnaround effort as a principal in the Bronx. Brandon has also worked as the director of strategic initiatives for the New York City Department of Education, guiding strategy for the city's most struggling schools, and most recently served as the senior education advisor to former New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio. It's also worth noting that Brandon was also recently appointed to the Boston School Committee by Mayor Michelle Wu. So I am going to get us started with questions. I have observed panels where, Brandon, you have served as a moderator, and a very good one. So if you feel the spirit to jump over at some point and ask questions, I will invite you to do that yourself. But I think this first question is for everybody. So we've heard a lot of research presentations this morning, and then we also heard an impassioned keynote just now that all have looked at how we might leverage policy to center students with disabilities and emergent bilingual learners into the work we do in schools. These are populations of students who have traditionally been marginalized. And so I think the question I have for you is, in your respective roles, can you talk a little about your efforts to center these teachers and these students in your work? And if you could just briefly talk about any challenges, but also any opportunities you have faced. And I will start with Alicia, if you're okay with me going to you first, Alicia.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you for having me this morning. As I was listening to Roberto, I was actually thinking of my own daughters. They have the privilege of going to the oldest, or attending the oldest immersion school in the state of Indiana. Their principal is an amazing person from Morocco who speaks what he says he calls 5.5 languages. His half language is Polish. His wife is Polish. And I'm just thinking about some of the experiences that they have had and what needs to be done. But as far as what Indiana is doing, I'm just a firm believer. I'm currently studying and researching for my dissertation, which is all about coaching and the impact of peer coaching on teacher evaluation and teacher ratings. But I'm thinking about our teacher shortage, and I'm also thinking about my own experience as a building leader and as a teacher. Most important, the biggest thing I believe we can do, the biggest step that we can do, is to continue to provide resources. And that may be, technical assistance, it may be mentorships, just a variety of making sure that our teachers are taken care of. Nate was kind enough in my bio to explain that I've always worked in Title I schools, and that really is my passion. So the underserved populations is where I've lived, and I just can't imagine living anywhere else. But we also know that those are some of your most challenging settings. And so when we think about districts that don't have a guaranteed and viable curriculum, who are no longer adopting textbooks, and we think about in some of those schools where our school nurses are the only or the first medical professional some of our children encounter, in some of those situations, if we aren't providing adequate resources to those educators, we're going to lose them. They just simply cannot keep up with all of the things that are necessary. And so part of my work, I'm in a brand new role at the Department of Ed. Our pandemic research showed that our 4 most challenged populations through the pandemic, but we know this was true before the pandemic. The pandemic just highlighted that Black, Hispanic, English learners, and our students with disabilities were our hardest hit groups. And so the department decided that it was time to build my team, which I'm still building right now. But our sole focus is providing technical assistance to school districts, to individual schools, to individual teachers, to parents, if that's what's necessary, to make sure that we are finding out exactly what it is they are needing. And if we can't provide it, finding the partner who can, so that we have less teacher turnover. If they have resources and they have support, they're less likely to leave this very noble profession. And we want to keep everybody on board that wants to be here, because without our teachers, our children are just left. And so we're trying everything that we can. I don't want to dwell on too much because I want my fellow panelists to be able to answer, but those are some of the big pieces in Indiana right now.
Thank you. Roberto, we'll turn to you. So just thinking about it in your role, some of the challenges and opportunities for centering both these teachers and these students.
Yeah, thank you, Nate. And I just really appreciated Alicia's points there too. I think, the opportunity here is to center our work and our orientation around preparing and supporting our educators in this workforce, to center that around the needs of the whole child, right? So what are the implications of that for whole educator preparation? How are we preparing our educators early to meet the social and emotional needs and mental health and well-being of our students? How are we doing more to make sure that our educators are able to personalize their learning and the instruction for students? So I think that's a great opportunity that I see. There are a lot of, from where we sit here in Washington, a lot of opportunities to be a catalyst and a partner with institutions of higher education, our ed prep programs, and with our districts, whether that's through Title II of the Every Student Succeeds Act or Title II of the Higher Education Act. We have a teacher quality partnerships program that where we support and invest in programs that help prepare our educators. We have the IDEA dollars that I mentioned during my remarks, as well as the Title III dollars. So all of those are nice investments to help support the work. But I think we also, beyond that, need to make sure that we're getting just more serious about disrupting some of the norms in our system right now, from pre-service all the way to in-service professional learning and development, that are honestly getting in the way of a deeper level of preparation and success for our educators. So our teachers, and Alicia alluded to this too, we cannot afford to have one individual educator in the building responsible for our emergent bilingual students or our students with disabilities. We cannot afford to silo the preparation of our teachers to that end and then not create the structures in our schools for our teachers to learn from one another and to do a better job from pre-service in terms of how we prepare our special educators, so that, as we know that all of our teachers are going to need a level of preparation around meeting the needs of children with disabilities. We have to do better to create that imperative for all of our teachers before they reach the classroom. And once they're in the school, we need to create more opportunities for our teachers to learn from one another and to surge a greater supply of our educators who are deeply prepared in meeting the needs of our students with disabilities, who are deeply prepared in second language acquisition and in those methodologies of connecting the language and the learning that they're as assets that their emergent bilingual kids bring, connecting those to English. Those are approaches, methodologies, pedagogies that are missing too often and that need to be dramatically democratized in the schools in which our children are learning. So those pieces, I don't know that we're as well prepared from where I sit at a policy perspective to make those sweeping changes. But boy, I see the need for those in a real way in our schools and in our districts. And we want to help promote that. It's a little bit of a mindset, culture change, and an opportunity to approach the preparation and ongoing learning of our educators in some new ways.
We are going to come back to this question of preparation, because I think it's another side of the coin that we have not spent as much time talking about today. But Roberto, in your comments, I hear it recurring, and I think it is an important component of all of this. Brandon, I did want to give you, we have you now, and I did want to give you a chance to kind of pipe in before I moved on to the next question.
Well, one, thank you, and thanks for being patient with my tech. And I want to echo everything Roberto and Alicia said. But at the same time, I would offer, I don't need to sort of repeat what's been put out there, but I would offer that on a sort of local level, really simply, people leave bosses. They often don't just leave a job. And there's work that's happening from sort of the school leadership level that we need to nurture and support and honor. And I think at the same time, as we know, for those of us who've been school leaders, those messages and those priorities are coming from a district level. And so when we're watching turnover and we're experiencing it in real time, this is the historical turnover that we've seen. And also as we're watching this sort of great resignation, we're talking about real sort of system level problems around how we support school leaders and how school leaders can really show up to run organizations that are affirming, that are supportive, and help people create a work experience where they feel successful and a work-life balance experience where they feel like they can be successful at home and at their job. And I think there's a lot to be said about the role of school leadership in really supporting retention. And then I think the other thing that's really important just to add into this conversation and things that I'm thinking about and seeing, and I'm sure we all are, is there is this moment of resignation that we're watching, people leaving the workforce. But there's the movers and then there's the leavers, and both are happening in real time and they're important to talk about. There's the folks who are just moving across the system, different schools, different places, and that's disruptive. I'm thinking about myself. I take a new job. It takes months to feel equipped and sort of ready. I think at my current job, it took me 3 months to figure out where the bathroom was, right? I was lost in the maze of the building, forget the stuff and things of serving kids. And we, in a system where most of our schools are operating in 10-month cycles, every time you just have a mover who's moving between schools, you are losing really valuable time in your ability to sort of accelerate opportunity for kids. And then, of course, you have the leavers, and we have to really have hard conversations around why do people want to leave this work? Why is it not desirable? There's big questions, obviously, to ask. And I think a lot of it starts with school leadership.
Nate, can I just jump in there for what I can't resist? I have to do this just one really quickly. I love those points that Brandon raised. One of the things that I hear a lot from some of our best educators, I hear in particular from our bilingual educators, that burns them out a bit, is this sense that they are always looked to as the only person who is responsible in that school for those kids. Right. So I just want to posit, how do we disrupt that norm? I mean, how do we get to a place where if we're going to be about equity, let's walk the walk. These are all of our kids, our emergent bilingual learners, our learners with disabilities. We are collectively responsible. And what are we doing at a leadership level, at every level, to prepare our educators and to create that shared expectation?
Nate, you're muted.
I was saying the point you raised earlier about preparation feeds right into that, right? So if the reality is that in most states, teachers are required to have a single course in supporting students with disabilities. Are we preparing people that are going to enter the profession and disrupt that siloing you're describing? So I think it's a really important point. One question that I have, I think, for all of you, because I've noticed it as a tension, and I think this question of looking beyond special educators and teachers of English learners to really broaden the number of folks who have responsibility for kids with disabilities and English learners in classrooms, that feels like an important point that I heard across many of the comments you raised and in some of our previous conversations. At the same time, one of the themes that we heard from yesterday is that teachers are struggling, right? We heard several former teachers of the year, and as they described what it means to be in a school right now, they described this burden and this weight and this feeling overtaxed. And so I wonder if you could help me think about, how do you navigate this situation where it's clear that we need our general educators to be more responsive to various student populations, but at the same time, these are folks who at present are burdened. How can we shift these mindsets in ways that don't feel like we are saying do more? Because frankly, I don't know if people are prepared to do more. Does that make sense? I don't know if any of you folks have thoughts on where we go with that.
If I could jump in, I want to hit on what Brandon said. Having been a building principal for a long time, I believe that marriage between what you're leading in your building and what central office is asking you to do is sometimes a difficult dance. However, the building leader completely shapes what's happening in that school building. And so if the building leader believes in inclusive practices, if the building leader is leading that charge and leading by example and showing the ways that it can be done, and providing the resources, you can, well, you can, but it'd be really terrible as a building leader to just say, I need this done, and then not lead that charge. And so I tend to be an introvert, which just shocks people. But at the same time, you have to have collaborative teams, and you've got to get people on your side. And you mentioned that blue ribbon, and that was purely 8-step. And when I wanted to bring 8-step to my building, the first thing I did was get my biggest naysayer on board. That's the first thing I did, because if I could get her on board, then all the other teachers were like, wait a minute, if she's going to do it, then we can easily get it done. And so I think being strategic in your planning, I think making sure that you are familiar with the research, which is really hard as a building leader because you're tasked to do so many things. I was most recently introduced to Shelley Moore and her book on inclusion and some of her attitudes about what inclusion looks like, even though her experience is specific to special education and students with disability. It was something that I just kept in mind about inclusion across the board. And I think about the EL teacher in my last building who was responsible for 125 students, and how well she worked with her general ed colleagues to partner with them. That was just her mission. She knew she had my support, and there was such a partnership that it wasn't anything additional. And so I think that it does start, as Brandon pointed out, with that building leadership, and just I never had any fights in my building, and I had very low union representation, even though I really believe in unions. So I do want to say that, but I had very low union representation in my building because we just always talked about putting kids first. And when you talk about putting kids first, who can argue with that? Like, let's talk about the data. Let's talk about the experience. Let's talk about what we're doing for our kids and shifting those outcomes. And when we did that, we just really didn't have a lot of fight on anything that we were doing, and it wasn't additional. My teachers were always just really happy to be a part of making an impression on kids' lives.
I'll just piggyback on Alicia, unless you were going to go, Roberto. No, and circling back to your question, Nate. One, I think it's like important, and we can't say it enough, like teachers are exhausted. And the demands we've put on them over the last few years have been increasingly complex. in addition to like the big T trauma that like all of us universally have been experiencing. And they've been put in a broader sort of political debate around COVID, around health and safety, as well as a major shift in their own professional development around what they can do and can't do with technology. And some of the best professional development we've probably ever seen in this country, if you really think about it, because it was like a push like no other. And then at the same time, they're supposed to drive outcomes and impact social emotional learning and then sort of deal with the confluence of all of the other political issues that we're facing. It's exhausting, it's tiring. And I will argue particularly for folks who are charged with leading the service of some of our most vulnerable students, special education students and non-native English speakers or multilingual learners. For those folks, the portfolio of their work has always been under-resourced. If we were having this conversation in 2017, you would have heard from those educators that the workforce was already under-resourced. And oftentimes, and this is an interesting moment to have this conversation because almost every school district in the country is in the middle of a budget process, right? They're thinking about their budgets for next year as they're waiting for states and the feds to sort of make decisions and give them clarity as well. Right. The floor that we were reaching just to meet compliance was like the best we ever thought we could arrive at. And so and we were rarely meeting that. And I'm thinking about even my own experience in New York, like we had a floor that we still couldn't meet then. And we are now have a floor with increased complexity, obviously, given COVID and a lot of competing priorities. But we have a floor that we're further away from reaching and an opportunity around investment that can actually help us redefine what that floor is. And so as we're talking about teachers can't take more, and we're watching school districts bring in additional resources, sometimes growing their central teams over the table of organization on the ground, we have to ask questions around, well, maybe if there were more teachers in a building, maybe if we were thinking about this investment, this moment of investment, really focused on how do we expand the number of folks who are actually servicing students. I think that will have a real shift in how people feel. I don't think it's less about just adding more on, and it might be looking across the room and being do we need more people here? And I think that if educators were seeing that type of investment in personnel as part of the strategy, increasing salaries, but also increasing the number of folks who are in the workforce, I think it would start to really shift the way folks feel about the current ask and demand.
Thank you. Roberto, do you have any other reflections on this?
Well, I mean, I just very quickly, I want to just add my voice to that because we have to focus on the need to get more of our educators deeply prepared and into the classroom, right? We are, tens of thousands of educators down as part of this pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, if you look back over the previous 12 years, 900,000 fewer teacher candidates in our teacher prep programs. So I think just what's so resonant from Brandon's remarks there too is that, there is both the compounding social and emotional and professional challenges that this pandemic has brought on for teachers. And I can't tell you the number of tremendous national board certified with number of accolades and others that I've talked to. And some of them who've been in the classroom 15, 16 years who are told me, at the first year of this pandemic, I can't do this anymore, right? I'm feeling like I'm a first year teacher. I'm not getting the support that I need. I'm worried about my students. It's overwhelming. So we have to do better, but I think part of that is bringing more and attracting more teachers and school staff and we have an opportunity to do that because we actually have $122 billion in the system right now. When have we ever seen that level of investment in public education? Those dollars can be put to work today for our students, for our educators, for our principals. So let's think about how that is an opportunity to build a bridge to a more permanent surge and a more permanent supply of well-prepared and diverse educators for our students.
I think that is such an excellent point. I'm just going to pause. We have about, it looks like between 10 and 15 minutes left. I am happy to continue asking questions. I have many, but I also invite our guests to ask questions of the panelists. You can put them in the Q&A that is down in the Zoom, but we will try to monitor those. There is a question in there which leads me to, I think, the twin aims that we have facing us at the moment. And collectively, based on everything we've heard, it sounds like we have two things we need to accomplish. And maybe there's more than two things. I'm going to say two things. So thing one is preparing a workforce that has the adequate training to support the students we're describing and support all students. And that is the technical skills, that is the knowledge, that is the disposition to support students. But then it's also creating a workplace that these folks want to go to and want to stay in. And I think we've heard a number of calls to really push on how schools are currently structured and whether or not we can think about new approaches to make the work of teaching and the profession of teaching something that people seek out. So I think we have a bit of time to discuss both of these. Brandon, I'm going to come back to you to ask the question of like the workplace we're preparing people to enter. But I think on the preparation side, Roberto and Alicia, I think you both represent kind of two levels of systemic change. And so I'm curious from both of your perspectives, what are the kinds of things we might want to think about doing in teacher preparation to ensure that educators walk into the classroom ready to support some of these marginalized student populations. I'll also note, and if either one of you wants to take up the specific issue, Clarence Little, who's one of our guests in the Q&A, has asked about practicum experiences and whether or not that could become a place where we think about giving general education teachers opportunities to support students with disabilities as one way to kind of bridge that gap. So I think the big question on the table is like, what can we be doing? Like, how should we see teacher preparation as a lever? And what are their specific recommendations for what to do within teacher preparation to address this issue?
So I can kick us off there on that great question, Nate, and I love Alicia and Brandon's reflections on it too. I think we have an evidence base around what we know works when our teachers are prepared with a deeper level of clinical preparation that is more diverse, with an opportunity to follow their preparation over a number of years, right? Our residencies and some of our Grow Your Own programs have disproportionately higher rates of graduation, early career success, and long-term retention in the field. And so they're more expensive, and their prep pathways that work. I don't think we need to limit ourselves only to a one-size-fits-all approach, but I do think we can follow the research around how to prepare our educators and connect that pre-service experience to those first 5 years, right? I think that's another kind of key design feature, is how are we doing more to make sure that there's that depth of clinical support, but then also that doesn't go away. We hand our educators off too quickly today. And then it is this kind of sink or swim with very little mentorship for too many of our teachers. And, so I'd love to go in that direction. I can't resist also just touching on Reggie's question from the chat too, which is, asking a little bit more about how do we support our teachers to be able to meet their needs and be student-centered and create a student-centered whole child approach while also attending to being teacher-centered. And that is a good just reminder that our teachers can't do it all on their own. Like any one single teacher doesn't do it all on her or his own. And so it speaks to the need to, again, bring more individuals, more adults that can build that relationship and that support around for their kids. The president's made it really clear what he wants us to do, which is to double the number of school psychologists and social workers and other mental health professionals in our schools who can be a resource to our students alongside their educators. And if I reflect back to Upward Bound, which Reggie refers in his references and is one of my earliest and still favorite jobs in education, was to work in the summer programs for our Upward Bound kids back in my hometown of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and to have a great certified teacher who has a depth of preparation in what kids are going to know and need to know and be able to do in English and grammar and composition, and to work alongside that individual to also be that tutor and that counselor and connect the learning and development for those students all the way into the evening hours and the weekend hours. But that is a perfect, all hands on deck approach, right? Multiple individuals tasked with the development, learning, and success of students, right? So it's not one teacher that does that on her or his own. It takes a village.
Thank you. I think it's an excellent point. Alicia, do you have any other thoughts from your perspective as a state leader?
So in listening to what Roberto has said and Brandon has said, I met with my dissertation chair yesterday, and we were talking about the distinct need for higher ed to change their mindset. And I think back to my own teacher prep program, and it's been a few years. And I think about my pre-service experience, and I think about as a school principal, as a school leader, some of the student teachers that I welcomed into my building and the experiences, and I partnered with my teachers before they ever got a student teacher. And student teachers were only assigned to certain teachers. And we talked about the experiences we wanted them to have. There was almost kind of a checklist of things we wanted to make sure that they experience. And so I think that we're going to have to shift the mindset. And our discussion yesterday about higher ed was really about how Indiana is kind of leading the nation in some regards related to our student pathways and CTE and some other things, and how, again, higher ed really has to change their mind. So I think that there's an opportunity. The pandemic kind of, I think of the game Boggle, right, where you have the box and you're shaking up all of those die with the letters on them, and that's really what has happened here in the pandemic. And so we have this opportunity to really just reshape and think, okay, what do we actually need? What experiences do teachers, pre-service teachers, actually need to be successful? Because Roberto's right, we put them in lecture halls, we graduate them, and then we throw them into a classroom that looks nothing like any of those lecture halls that they experienced. And so our mentor programs, I'm glad that they exist, but I think that those need rethought. Many school districts have mentor programs, but how much are they investing in that partnership? Our coaching, I've seen some amazing coaching models. The district I just left happens to be one of my favorite coaching models. But one thing, they got it right, but one thing they didn't get right or they need to improve is the training of the coaches. You can't just select highly effective teachers. That doesn't automatically make them a good coach. And though I had 6 really great coaches, we spent a lot of time in my building talking about what coaching looked like. And luckily it's of high interest to me, but a principal that doesn't have that high interest or that need. And so not only do we have to focus on that pre-service experience, but also those foundational few years. And then also let's think about our veteran teachers. I took a teacher out of a 3rd grade classroom to make her my EL teacher because it was a passion of hers. And I saw what she was doing in general ed, and I knew she was going to be amazing with my English learners. But that was a new experience for her, even though she was a veteran teacher. So it's so important that even our more veteran teachers who are shifting roles, Brandon talked about all the technology that all of us, we all had to learn, right? I made some serious blunders on Zoom in those first few calls, and muting when I wasn't supposed to, or not muting when I should have, and some of those things. The amazing things that teachers are able, educators are able to do, we really just have got to rethink how we lend our support for that. And I also think, that mental health, if we're not honoring that work-life balance, people do quit. That's why I left. I was not looking to come to the state. I'm very glad I'm here, but I was not looking to come to the state. I loved my building. I loved my kids. I loved my teachers, but I couldn't take the stress of it and having my own families. And so teachers, educators, everybody does quit bosses. Brandon is so correct in that. And so we've got to make sure that we are offering support and rethinking, working smarter, not harder. We talk about it all the time, but how much are we really investing in working smarter instead of harder?
I am here for any and all Boggle analogies, but that might just be my love of word games. I also just want to briefly note, Reggie, Roberto asked that question. He leads our Upward Bound program here at BU and does an amazing job. And we are so fortunate to have him. We have very little time left. And Brandon, part of me is inclined to ask you how you would fix the structure of U.S. schools to make them more supportive of educators and give you 30 seconds to do it. But I'm also torn because Ariel Tickner-Wagner, who's one of our faculty members, asked this really important question about emergent bilinguals' home languages. And so I'm a little bit torn about where to go with this. I'm going to leave it up to you. So Brandon, you can answer either question. So one question is, how do we fix school environments to make them healthier places for educators? The second question, equally important, is, and I'm going to try to figure out a way to kind of make this a shorter question, but like how we can ensure that the majority, how can we reverse the situation where the majority of schools in our country do not elevate or address emergent bilinguals' home languages and leave schools academically monolingual in English when they graduate high school? Yeesh.
Well, also, like, two very simple questions. So
exactly. That's what I'm here for.
I'm going to just throw out some thoughts really fast. We'll see if I'm answering something. I think first, I just am echoing what Roberto said about the handoff too quickly. And I think we know, particularly for students of color, right? Like, young folks of color have less experienced teachers, fewer years of service with higher turnover. And I would argue that part of that, and this impacts emergent bilingual students deeply, I think part of this is around the handoff. Like, we need a system, like in other professions, where maybe it's a reduced workload that first year. Maybe it's a reduced workload your second year, right? But like that you're building the skills with the right support, and that we're thinking about practicum outside of just the university experience, but embedded in the district level support that we build. And we could talk about that forever. And I will say this, I will apologize deeply to every student I taught in my first year because my handoff was far too quick. And the other thing I would add really fast is and I think it's something that Alicia said, and I think this is super true. It's like knowing your people. And it's knowing your people as a school leader, but also on the district level. Like, who can you move where? Who can you tap and bring into the pipeline so that they can move into the profession in a different way? And it's like knowing your people, not just your teachers, right? It's like everyone matters. It's the best promotion. The best person I ever picked up in my school was a young woman, I'm naming her Maylene, who was a school safety agent. And I had seen her, I had seen the way that she worked with kids. And I was like, I will do anything possible to get you into a classroom with young people. And the same is true across all of our buildings. There's someone in your cafeteria, there's someone who's doing school safety, there's a paraprofessional, there's a school secretary. There are people in our midst who need to be tapped for opportunity, because so often, and I'm speaking for myself, we're just like, we are not taught to believe that the room is for us. And so sometimes we need someone to give us a little push and remind us that we belong there. And I think we often look away and we're waiting for people to come to us, and we're not doing the work of pulling people in. And I think that answers as much as I can answer in what was more than 30 seconds.
Yes, sir, you stuck the landing. Thank you for that. Well, I want to thank the three of you. I think it is so clear the passion you bring to this work, and that across all levels of our system, our students are in good hands. I want to take the time to thank you and to thank the organizers of the event, and then turn this over to Dean Chard for some closing remarks. I do not know how you're going to summarize what have been 2 amazing days of discourse across our community. So thank you all, and I'll turn it over to David.
Nate, thank you. And thank you to the presenters, terrific panel. And I sort of chuckle at Brandon's comment about the softball questions, because nothing in the last 2 days of this forum have been softball. It's been complicated, conditional questions I think we're all very interested in trying to find answers to. I'm going to keep my remarks brief. I do want to thank the Wheelock Education Policy Center, and particularly Megan Combe, for putting together 2 days of amazing panels and presenters. People from around the country and around the world have joined our audience. We're thrilled to have you here. The purpose of this forum annually is to really tackle some of these big questions using our understanding of research, our connections to our partners and practice, and to try to sort of inform ourselves of what's happening and who's doing what and where. And I have a couple of observations to say that I think if you're doing research that isn't informed by what's happening in schools and school districts and classrooms, it is irrelevant. And if you are doing practice or leading school districts, or for that matter, working in federal government, and you're not informed by research, it's irresponsible. And so this partnership we share, I think, is illustrated in the forum and the panelists' comments throughout the last 2 days. I also think it's important to remind ourselves that we're all on the same team. And sometimes we forget that. And sometimes we allow wedges to be driven between policymakers, teachers, researchers, school leaders, that become more important than the challenges that are most important to children, families, and communities who need us to be solving problems. So I want to caution us to look to critical discourse, really sort of asking and answering some of these fundamental questions will require disagreement, absolutely. But let's not forget that we don't want to overly politicize issues or allow wedges to be driven between us, because we require one another to help solve some of the challenges that we've been discussing over the last 2 days. And we have a shared responsibility for that, for solving these problems. Someone said, and I can't remember which of our panelists said this line that I think is brilliant: we have to be focused on all of it. And I hope that our audience, our panelists, our partners, our alumni, that everyone in the past 2 years, we've watched a public health crisis unroll. And part of that was because we didn't have a sense of shared responsibility, a sense of building evidence maps, a sense of building trustworthy understanding of what really supports systems of public health, transforms systems. And we don't want the same thing to happen to us in public education. We want to build those evidence maps, understand that the differences that learners bring to the classroom are all important. The differences that teachers bring to classrooms are all important, and that we're in this together, and we have to focus on all of it. So lastly, I want to thank the team of people who put this forum together each year, led by Mary Ellen Medallo, who just does a fabulous job. You don't see these people working behind the scenes, but they are really, they're the heavy lifters who make these events work. And so thank you for being part of this last 2 days. I've walked away with a lot of things to follow up with people on, and I know that the same is true for those of you who are with us. So Thank you very much, and have a great rest of your Friday and a great weekend. Take care. Bye-bye.